Cardiac collapse. Stage. Andreas Munzer was an Austrian professional bodybuilder who died on March 14, 1996, at a hospital in Munich, Germany. He was 31 years old. Munzer had built his career around a quality that separated him from nearly every other competitor in the world. Where most professional bodybuilders pursued size, Munzer pursued definition. His body fat at the time of competition was measured at under 2%, a figure that placed him in a category of 1. Muscles that would be invisible on other competitors were visible on Munzer. The striations in his legs, his back, his chest were so pronounced that photographs of him were used in anatomy discussions. He did not look like a man who had dieted. He looked like a man who had been rendered. He was born in Gratkorn, Austria, and had been competing professionally since the mid-1980s. He was not the largest man on any stage he entered, but he was consistently one of the most discussed. Judges and audiences alike responded to the extremity of his conditioning. He placed competitively throughout his career, earning a reputation that extended well beyond Austrian borders and into the international circuit that the International Federation of Bodybuilding and Fitness governed. In early March of 1996, Munzer traveled to Columbus, Ohio, to compete in the Arnold Classic, one of the most prominent professional bodybuilding contests on the annual calendar. The Arnold Classic drew the top competitors in the world. It was held at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Columbus, a venue that had become central to the sport's professional calendar, since Arnold Schwarzenegger began lending his name to the event in 1989. Munzer stepped on stage, competed against the field, and placed in the lineup. He was not a first-place finisher at that contest, but he was present, he was competing, and by all visible measures, he was functional. After the Arnold Classic concluded, Munzer flew back to Europe. Those around him in the sport did not report dramatic visible signs of collapse in the days that followed. He had been living inside an extreme physical protocol for years. The kind of preparation required to achieve sub 2% body fat does not happen in the weeks before a contest. It is the product of a sustained regimen, maintained across months and years, that pushes the body's chemical environment to its outer limits. Munzer had been in that environment for a long time. On March 12, 1996, Munzer was admitted to a hospital in Munich. He was experiencing severe abdominal pain. The pain was significant enough that he sought emergency medical care. Hospital staff assessed him and determined that surgical intervention was necessary. Surgeons performed emergency abdominal surgery on Munzer beginning on March 12th. The operation lasted approximately 12 hours. It was not a short procedure or a minor one. For 12 hours, a surgical team worked inside his abdominal cavity. What they found during that surgery, and what became clear in the hours that followed, was that Munzer's internal organs were in a state of acute failure. His liver was failing, his kidneys were failing. The surgery that had been initiated to address his abdominal crisis could not reverse the underlying organ deterioration. The damage was not surgical in origin. It was systemic. Medical teams continued to work on Munzer through the surgery and into the recovery period. His body did not respond. The liver, which processes and filters the compounds the body takes in, had been operating under extreme load for years. The kidneys, which regulate fluid balance and remove waste, had been subjected to the chemical pressures of a competitive bodybuilding career at the professional level. Neither organ could be stabilized. The intervention that had been attempted across 12 hours of surgery was not enough to stop what was happening inside his body. Organ failure of the kind Munzer was experiencing does not reverse easily under any circumstances. In his case, it did not reverse at all. Andreas Munzer was pronounced dead on March 14, 1996. He was 31 years old. The cause of death was acute liver and kidney failure. Post-mortem toxicology confirmed the presence of anabolic steroids and diuretics at extreme levels. His death became one of the most cited cases in the documented history of drug use in professional bodybuilding, referenced in medical literature, sporting investigations, and industry discussions about the physical cost of competition-level conditioning for decades afterward. Heart failure overnight. Mike Matarazzo was an American professional bodybuilder who died on August 16, 2014 in California. He was 48 years old. Matarazzo was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and came up in the sport during the 1990s, a decade when professional bodybuilding was experiencing its most commercially visible period. The sport had television coverage, magazine distribution, and a competitive circuit that drew international athletes and significant prize money. Matarazzo was part of that era. He competed at the professional level through the 90s, placing at contests on the IFBB Pro Circuit and building a recognizable name within the sport. He was known physically for his arms. In a sport where every competitor has well-developed arms, Matarazzo's stood out. They were one of his signature attributes, discussed by commentators and documented in the bodybuilding press. He was not a Mr. Olympia champion, but he was a consistent professional presence. the kind of competitor who showed up in lineups at major events and was taken seriously by the judging panels. Matarazzo competed during an era when the pharmacological side of professional bodybuilding was rarely discussed publicly. The protocols that competitors used to build and maintain their physiques were an understood but largely unspoken part of the professional landscape. Almost no one at that level spoke directly about what they used or what it cost them. Matarazzo, after his competitive career ended, became an exception to that pattern. In interviews conducted after his retirement from competition, Matarazzo spoke directly, and on the record about what he believed his years of competition had done to his cardiovascular system. He stated that he believed his drug use during his competitive career had damaged his heart. He did not hedge this. He said it clearly and allowed it to be reported. In doing so, he became one of the very few professional bodybuilders of his generation to make that direct connection publicly with his name attached. The cardiovascular disease he developed in his post-competition years was serious. He underwent open heart surgery. This was not a minor procedure. Open heart surgery requires stopping the heart, bypassing its function mechanically, operating on the organ itself, and restarting it. Recovery from open heart surgery is long and physically demanding under any circumstances. Matarazzo underwent it. His condition did not resolve after the open heart surgery. His cardiovascular system continued to deteriorate. He was subsequently determined to need a heart transplant, but he tragically passed away while awaiting the procedure at Stanford Hospital after suffering severe cardiac complications. The specific events of his final hospitalization were not publicly disclosed in detail by his family or medical team. Mike Matarazzo was pronounced dead on August 16, 2014. He was 48 years old. The cause of death was heart failure. He had spoken publicly, on the record, about the connection between his competitive career and the condition that killed him. Massive coronary home. Dallas McCarver was an American professional bodybuilder who was found unresponsive at his home in Boca Raton, Florida, on August 22, 2017. He was 26 years old. McCarver had been competing professionally in the IFBB Pro League, the top tier of professional bodybuilding. At 26, he was considered one of the most promising competitors in the sport. That assessment was not based on potential alone. McCarver had competed at major events and had already established himself as a presence in the upper tier of the professional league. In a sport where careers often span decades, he was in what should have been the early stages of a long run. He was large by any standard, including the elevated standard of professional bodybuilding. The men who compete at the IFBB Pro level are not ordinary athletes. They carry muscle mass that falls outside the normal range by a significant margin. Even within that context, McCarver was notable for his size. He was the kind of competitor whose presence on stage shifted the visual weight of a lineup. Earlier in 2017, McCarver had traveled to the United Kingdom to compete in the Arnold Classic UK. The Arnold Classic brand had expanded internationally from its original Columbus, Ohio base, with events in several countries on the annual schedule. McCarver competed at the UK event. He was active. He was on the competitive calendar. He had events scheduled ahead of him. He was living in Boca Raton, Florida at the time, and was in a high-profile relationship with WWE superstar Dana Brooke. The summer of 2017 was, by the visible markers of his professional life, a period of active competition and forward momentum. On August 22, 2017, McCarver was found unresponsive inside his Boca Raton home. He was not conscious when discovered. Emergency services were contacted and responded to the address. Emergency responders arrived at the home and found McCarver unresponsive. Resuscitation was attempted. The efforts made at the scene were not sufficient to revive him. He was transported from the home. The attempts to bring him back were unsuccessful. An autopsy was conducted following his death. The autopsy was performed to determine the cause and circumstances of his death. The findings were specific and have been reported publicly. The medical examiner's autopsy found cardiomegaly. Cardiomegaly is an abnormally enlarged heart. The heart, like any muscle, responds to the demands placed on it. A heart that is enlarged beyond its normal dimensions does not function the way a normally sized heart functions. The structural changes affect how the organ operates and what it can sustain. The autopsy identified this condition in McCarver's case. The cause of death was determined to be cardiac arrest. The autopsy also noted a partially obstructed airway due to food at the time of death. The medical examiner identified cardiac arrest as the primary cause of death. The airway finding was noted in the autopsy record but was not the primary determination. Dallas McCarver was pronounced dead on August 22, 2017. He was 26 years old. The cause of death was cardiac arrest. The autopsy finding of cardiomegaly was disclosed publicly and reported widely in bodybuilding and general sports media. His death at 26 became one of the most widely cited instances of early cardiac mortality in the documented history of professional bodybuilding. Sudden cardiac arrest. Daniele Seccarecci was an Italian professional bodybuilder who died suddenly from a heart attack on September 3, 2013, in Taranto, Italy. He was 33 years old. Seccarecci competed under the auspices of the WABA, the World Amateur Bodybuilding Association, which operated parallel to the better-known IFBB circuit. He had won the WABA World Championship. That title represented the highest level of achievement available within the organization that sanctioned his competition. Winning a world championship in any competitive discipline at any level requires sustained dedication, physical preparation, and the ability to perform at a peak level when it is required. He was documented as one of the heaviest competitive bodybuilders in the sport's recorded history at the time he held his WABA title. Reports from verified sources at the time placed his weight at approximately 320 pounds in contest condition. Contest condition in professional bodybuilding refers to the state a competitor maintains at the time of competition, which is typically a leaner and more precisely prepared state than off-season. 320 pounds in contest condition is an extreme figure by any measure within the sport. He was at an age where many competitive bodybuilders are in the middle of their competitive years, with career years still ahead of them. His professional life in the sport had produced a world title and a documented place in the record of his federation. On September 3, 2013, Seccarecci suffered a fatal myocardial infarction inside a local resort room. Italian authorities responded to the scene. An investigation was conducted to verify the sudden nature of his medical emergency. Italian media reported extensively on his sudden passing and the medical investigation that followed. The circumstances were confirmed to be entirely natural and related to sudden cardiac arrest. The suddenness of his passing shocked the international bodybuilding community, prompting a routine medical investigation by local authorities to establish the timeline of his cardiac arrest. Emergency responders attended the residence immediately following his sudden collapse. Seccarecci could not be revived by medical personnel. His death was officially confirmed on September 3, 2013. Italian health authorities conducted an official post-mortem examination following his collapse. The investigation confirmed no signs of foul play. The medical findings concluded that a massive heart attack was the sole cause of death for Daniele Seccarecci. Daniele Seccarecci was pronounced dead on September 3, 2013. He was 33 years old. The cause of death was a sudden heart attack. It was ruled a natural death. The bodybuilding community mourned his passing as judicial authorities concluded their routine assessment in Italy. Overdose, found alone. Paul DeMayo was an American professional bodybuilder who was found dead on June 2, 2005. He was 37 years old. DeMayo competed professionally in the IFBB Pro League during the 1990s. He was a presence on the professional circuit during that decade, which placed him in the same competitive generation as many of the sport's most recognized names. The 90s were a significant period for professional bodybuilding in terms of public visibility. The sport had magazine coverage, contest broadcasts, and a competitive infrastructure that supported a full professional circuit. DeMayo was part of that infrastructure. He was known by the nickname Quadzilla. Nicknames in professional bodybuilding often derive from a competitor's most pronounced physical attribute, and in DeMayo's case, that attribute was his legs, specifically his quadriceps. The quadriceps muscle group forms the front of the upper leg and is one of the most visually significant muscle groups in competitive bodybuilding, evaluated from the front in nearly every mandatory pose a competitor performs. DeMayo's quadriceps development was considered exceptional even within the context of professional competition, where exceptional leg development was the baseline expectation. He had competed at the Mr. Olympia contest. The Mr. Olympia is the most prominent contest in professional bodybuilding. It is held annually and draws the top-ranked competitors in the world. Qualifying for and competing at the Mr. Olympia is itself a marker of standing within the sport. DeMayo had been there. He had stood on that stage and competed against the best-ranked competitors in the professional field. After his competitive years, DeMayo maintained a lower public profile within the sport. The transition out of active professional competition is a significant one for any athlete. And in bodybuilding, where the competitive career is physically demanding and publicly focused, that transition can be abrupt. DeMayo's presence in the bodybuilding press diminished in the years following the end of his active competing. On June 2, 2005, Paul DeMayo was found dead. The cause of death was determined to be a heroin overdose. The specific circumstances of where he was found and who discovered him are not fully detailed in the confirmed public record available in English language verified sources. The cause of death, a heroin overdose, was confirmed. The specific substance involved has been thoroughly documented in publicly available records detailing his long struggle with opiate dependency. Paul DeMayo was pronounced dead on June 2, 2005. He was 37 years old. The cause of death was a heroin overdose. Champion, then cancer. Sonny Schmidt was a Samoan professional bodybuilder who died on January 25, 2004, following an illness. He was 50 years old. Schmidt was born in Western Samoa and built a professional bodybuilding career that took an unusual trajectory within the sport. Professional bodybuilding, at its most commercially visible tier, has historically been dominated by competitors in their 20s and 30s. The physical demands of competition at the highest level, combined with the recovery requirements and the physiological peak that the sport places value on, tend to concentrate competitive careers in that age range. Schmidt competed and won at an age that fell well outside it. He competed in the Masters division of professional bodybuilding. The Masters division is structured for competitors over the age of 40, providing a competitive category within the professional framework that recognizes athleticism and conditioning in an older cohort. It is not a consolation division. Competitors in the Masters division are professional bodybuilders. They prepare for competition with the same seriousness as any competitor at the professional level. Schmidt won the Masters Olympia. The Masters Olympia is the most significant title available within that division, held under the same organizational structure as the Mr. Olympia and carrying equivalent prestige within its competitive tier. Winning the Masters Olympia requires defeating the best competitors in the world within the division. Schmidt did that. His career demonstrated something the sport rarely had the opportunity to document, which was what a professional bodybuilder at a high competitive level looked like past the conventional age of peak competition. He was a known figure, a titled competitor, and a representative at the international level of the sport he had competed in for most of his adult life. Schmidt was diagnosed with cancer. The timeline of his diagnosis relative to his death is not documented in the confirmed public record with specific dates. His illness was known within the bodybuilding community. The specific details of Schmidt's medical treatment and the course of his illness are not part of the confirmed public record. What is confirmed is that he was ill and that he died from it. He died on January 25th, 2004. He was 50 years old, heart attack 44. Greg Kovacs was a Canadian professional bodybuilder who died on November 22, 2013 in Canada. He was 44 years old. Kovacs was born in Canada and competed in the IFBB Pro League during the 1990s and into the 2000s. He was a presence on the professional circuit during a period when the top tier of the sport was drawing its largest commercial audiences and its most extreme competitors. Within that context, Kovacs occupied a specific and documented position. He was not notable primarily for his competitive placings, though he competed at the professional level. He was notable for his size. In professional bodybuilding, size is not merely a casual descriptor. It is a competitive variable that is evaluated, discussed, and documented with precision. Competitors are weighed. Their dimensions are noted. Their off-season and on-season weights are reported in the bodybuilding press. The numbers attached to competitors become part of how they are understood within the sports community. The numbers attached to Kovacs were exceptional, even within a sport built around exceptional physical dimensions. His off-season body weight was reported in verified bodybuilding outlets at figures exceeding 400 pounds. 400 pounds is not a figure associated with athletic competition in most sports. Within professional bodybuilding, where off-season weight accumulation is part of the growth cycle, even the largest competitors rarely reach figures in that range. Kovacs did. He was documented and discussed within the sport specifically because of this. He competed at professional events during the 90s. He was seen on stage at IFBB Pro League contests. He was photographed, written about, and recognized within the sports community as a distinctive and extreme example of what the professional bodybuilding body could become when taken to its furthest physical extent. His career spanned the period when the sport was at or near its peak of commercial attention. As the 2000s progressed, Kovacs stepped back from active competition at the professional level. He was in his 40s. The years of competition and the physical demands of maintaining a body of his scale had accumulated. He remained a known figure in the sport's history, someone who was cited when discussions of extreme size in professional bodybuilding came up. On November 22, 2013, Greg Kovacs died of a heart attack. The specific circumstances of his final hours, including where he was, who was present, and whether emergency responders attended, are not detailed in the confirmed public record. No autopsy findings were released to the public in detail. Greg Kovacs died on November 22, 2013. He was 44 years old. The cause of death was a heart attack. Champion, then collapse. Mohammed Benaziza was an Algerian professional bodybuilder who died on October 4, 1992 in the Netherlands. He was 32 years old. Benaziza had built a professional bodybuilding career that placed him at the competitive level of the IFBB Pro Circuit through the late 1980s and early 1990s. The IFBB Pro Circuit during that period was the dominant tier of professional bodybuilding internationally. Competing on it meant traveling across Europe and to the United States for a calendar of Grand Prix events and culminating contests that drew the best competitors in the world. Benaziza had won multiple IFBB Grand Prix events during his career. Grand Prix victories in professional bodybuilding are cumulative evidence of competitive quality. A competitor who wins one Grand Prix has performed at a high level on a given day. A competitor who wins multiple Grand Prix events over the course of a career has demonstrated sustained competitive ability across different venues, judging panels and fields of competitors. Benaziza had done that. He was a serious titled professional in his sport. He was known for a physique that combined conditioning with proportion, the kind of balance that judges on the IFBB circuit rewarded. He was not the largest competitor on the circuit by mass, but he was competitive at the highest level, and his track record of Grand Prix victories reflected that. On October 4th, 1992, Benaziza was in the Netherlands to compete in the Dutch Grand Prix. The Dutch Grand Prix was a stop on the IFBB professional circuit, drawing professional competitors from across Europe and internationally. Benaziza was in the competitive lineup for that event. The competition proceeded. Benaziza stepped on stage, presented his physique to the judges, performed the required mandatory poses, and competed against the field. At the conclusion of the Dutch Grand Prix, on October 4th, 1992, Mohammed Benaziza was declared the winner. He had won the event. Shortly after the competition concluded, Benaziza collapsed. He had been on stage and received a first-place result. In the post-competition period, his condition changed rapidly. Medical personnel were present or were called immediately given the circumstances of the venue and the event. Medical response was initiated. Benaziza had collapsed and was attended to. The response was immediate. He died of heart failure. His death occurred in the hours following his victory at the Dutch Grand Prix. A post-mortem examination was conducted. The examination found evidence of excessive diuretic use. Diuretics are compounds that cause the body to shed water. In professional bodybuilding, diuretics are used in the final period before competition to reduce the subcutaneous water that softens muscular definition. The goal is to make the skin sit as close to the muscle as possible on the day of competition, sharpening the visual impact of conditioning. The use of diuretics in this context carries significant cardiovascular risk. Excessive diuretic use can alter the body's electrolyte balance, and electrolyte imbalance can trigger cardiac events. The postmortem examination identified excessive diuretic use as a contributing factor to Benaziza's cardiac event. He had won the Dutch Grand Prix on the evening of October 4th, 1992, and he did not survive the night. Mohammed Benaziza was pronounced dead on October 4th, 1992. He was 32 years old. The cause of death was heart failure. The post-mortem examination identified excessive diuretic use as a contributing factor. His death, alongside that of Andreas Munzer 4 years later, became part of documented discussions within the sport and in medical literature about the cardiovascular risks associated with competitive bodybuilding preparation protocols. Sudden medical emergency. Art Atwood was an American professional bodybuilder who died on September 11, 2011, following a sudden medical emergency. He was 37 years old. Atwood competed in the IFBB Pro League during the 2000s. He was part of a generation of professional bodybuilders who came into the sport after the dominant competitive era of the 1990s, entering a professional landscape where the size expectations for competitive bodybuilding had continued to increase. The competitors who placed at major events in the 2000s were, as a group, larger than the competitors who had placed at major events a decade before. Atwood was part of that progression. He was known for extreme size. Within professional bodybuilding, where everyone present has built a body that exceeds the normal human range in terms of muscular development, extreme size is a meaningful descriptor. It identifies competitors whose physical scale places them at the outer edge of even the professional spectrum. Atwood was that kind of competitor. He was large. His presence in a lineup was noted in the bodybuilding press in terms that reflected his physical scale. He competed at IFBB Pro League events throughout the mid-2000s, appearing in the lineups of professional contests and building a record as a competitor. His name was documented in the results of professional contests and in the coverage those contests received in bodybuilding media. He was a professional with a professional record. After his competitive career ended, Atwood's public presence in the sport diminished. The trajectory of a professional bodybuilder after active competition ends varies. Some step back entirely. Atwood's profile lowered after his competitive years. Those within the bodybuilding community who had known him during his competitive period noted the speed of his physical decline in the years following his retirement from competition. The specific triggering event occurred while he was walking through his condominium complex's pool area in Dallas, Texas, where he suddenly collapsed from a massive heart attack. The exact circumstances are well documented, noting that fellow residents pulled him from the pool and attempted resuscitation before paramedics arrived. His death was confirmed by sources within the bodybuilding community and reported across major bodybuilding publications on September 11, 2011. Art Atwood died on September 11, 2011. He was 37 years old. The cause of death was a massive heart attack. Valentine's Day murder. Ray McNeil was an American professional bodybuilder who was shot and killed on February 14, 1995 at his home in Oceanside, California. He was 34 years old. Ray McNeil was an IFBB professional bodybuilder. He had competed at the professional level and was part of the IFBB circuit that represented the top tier of the sport during the early 1990s. Professional bodybuilding in that period was a demanding competitive pursuit with a full annual calendar of events and a clearly defined hierarchy of titles and placings. McNeil was a professional within that system. Sally McNeil was also a competitive athlete. She competed in professional arm wrestling and was also involved in bodybuilding competition herself. The two had met and married. Both were physically large people by the standards of most households, a function of the athletic lives they had built and the physical preparation those lives required. February 14, 1995 was Valentine's Day. On the evening of February 14, 1995, Sally McNeil shot Ray McNeil inside their home in Oceanside, California. Sally McNeil placed a call to 911 herself. She called emergency services and reported what had happened. Law enforcement and emergency responders were dispatched to the address in Oceanside. Responders arrived at the home. Ray McNeil had been shot. He was found at the scene. He did not survive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. He had been shot and the injuries were fatal. Sally McNeil was at the home when law enforcement arrived. She was taken into custody. A homicide investigation was opened. Ray McNeil's death was ruled a homicide. Sally McNeil was charged with murder. The case proceeded through the California criminal justice system. A trial was held. At trial, the prosecution and defense presented their respective accounts of what had happened inside the home on the evening of February 14th. The accounts differed. The prosecution argued that the killing was not a lawful act. The defense offered a different characterization of the events. The jury returned a verdict. Sally McNeil was convicted of second-degree murder. The conviction was for the killing of Ray McNeil on February 14, 1995. She was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. The sentencing reflected the jury's verdict and the applicable California law for second-degree murder. The case was documented extensively through the trial, through media coverage, and through a 2022 Netflix documentary series titled Killer Sally, which revisited the events of that evening and the trial that followed. Ray McNeil was pronounced dead on February 14, 1995. He was 34 years old. The cause of death was a gunshot wound. It was ruled a homicide. Sally McNeil was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.